Okay. Let's see, 1 second. Just checking. You have to click on the link join video conference for the session. Does this work, Denise? Denise, does this work?
Did you send me something?
No, it should be in the Moodle course. It says like
So I went to the Moodle course, I clicked on that link, and it took me into the enrollment options.
then enroll in the course.
What?
Try to enroll in the course.
Yeah, I can't click on anything.
Oh, okay. Should have been done automatically.
One thing that, can you, if you have Zoom open for a thing, can you send Justin and I the link?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the link right now. Save.
I can't get it either.
Yeah. Okay, let me try to get that, okay? Hello, everybody. Is there someone in this room from the MtMoot conference? An administrator?
That would be me.
Okay. Hey, Matt.
Hey, how are you?
Justin is on already. Okay, so we have everybody. So, Denise, do you want me to hang up? Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
See, I cannot hear you. Hey, Justin.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Let me try again. Let's see.
Well, Christian, if you like, we could, if folks have questions, we could just relay those questions to you, or they might just enter them into the chat. Why am I talking? Christian can't hear me.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. It would have been good on my side if I would have turned on the loudspeaker, the volume, but sometimes.
So I apologize to everyone. I'm sitting outside because it's noisy in my house. I'm not sure it's any quieter out here. It's quite windy and there's a plane going over. So if the noise is terrible, I apologize. All right. Well, I will go ahead and share my screen here and we can get started. All right. Are folks able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Terrific. Okay. Well, hello. Let's see here. It is 4:33. Do we want to give folks another minute to file in? So hello, everyone. Greetings. So our presentation is on a pilot project that we began in the spring of 2020 to use micro-credentials to assess 21st century skills in business student interns at Montana Western. I'm joined by Dr. DeniseHolland and Dr. ChristianGilde, who are both professors in the Business and Technology Department. My name is JustinMason, and I'm the Director of E-Learning and Academic Technology here at Montana Western. And our agenda for this session starts with a description of the challenge that we were trying to address with our use of micro-credentials. And we're going to follow that up with an introduction to badges and micro-credentials, then an overview of the tools that we used for this pilot project, especially how it looked inside Moodle. Then Dr. Gilde will talk about the changing landscape of higher education and how that's relevant to micro-credentials, as well as discuss the guiding 21st century skills and experiential learning theory behind our use of micro-credentials. And then Dr. DeniseHolland, who taught our internship class, will discuss insights from the pilot and any results. So, without any further delay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to frame our session both in terms of an opportunity for educators and especially educators in higher education, and also not just the opportunity, but also the challenge that comes with that opportunity. So the opportunity that I'm talking about is how to assess and recognize all of the incredibly valuable learning that happens outside of formal classrooms. This image of the iceberg represents the totality of a person's life-wide learning and is meant to illustrate how the learning that gets formally assessed and recognized is only a part, and at that maybe even a relatively small part, of all of the learning that happens in our lives that we would consider meaningful and that would impact what we know and can do. So as we look deeper down into the iceberg, moving from the formal classroom-based learning at the surface level down to the deeper and darker waters of informal and unstructured learning, the learning becomes less visible to those who are not immediately involved. But that doesn't mean that it's less valuable. The challenge for us is is how to make assessment and recognition of that harder to see informal and unstructured learning more visible, more effective, and at the same time more manageable for faculty and more scalable for institutions. So we believe that our pilot project represents one approach for how microcredentials can be used to efficiently and effectively assess and recognize 21st century skills that are demonstrated by students in the unstructured learning environment of an internship. But further, we suspect that our pilot has been a successful proof of concept for how microcredentials might be used by higher ed more generally.
Justin, there's a lot of wind noise that it's really hard to hear you.
Okay. I will try to. I'll try to adjust a little bit here. I apologize for the wind noise. It's even noisier in my house. I have a house full of cranky children. Is that any better?
That's a lot better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you for speaking up. Okay, right. So our use of microcredentials is here, and I'll try to scoot over out of the wind even a little more because I can feel it blowing on me. So our use of microcredentials was a way of structuring the unstructured and informal and non-formal learning of internships. But even beyond that this particular pilot, we suspect that this may be a successful proof of concept for how microcredentials might be used in higher education more generally to inject structure into unstructured and hard to see learning environments, such as internships, learning communities, service learning, and community-based learning, and co-curricular activities such as student clubs, student governance, and student jobs. And through the injection of structured assessment, the hope is to be able to recognize students for all kinds of skills and accomplishments, even those hard to assess 21st century soft skills that are so valued by employers. So just a quick note here regarding the value of informal learning. I think there are at least a couple of ways that if we need to make the case for this, there are at least a couple of ways that assessment and recognition of informal and non-formal learning represents an opportunity for higher education. One has to do with increased access to higher ed for those who are traditionally underserved and to support lifelong learning. And Dr. Gilde might touch on those topics in his discussion of the changing landscape of higher ed. And if not, happy to take those kinds of questions at the end. But another opportunity comes in the form of improved learning and improved student outcomes. So I think a lot of you are likely familiar with George Koo and the AAC&U high impact practices that they've identified, which are practices that have been widely tested and shown to positively impact student outcomes and things like retention and completion. So a number of these practices are the sorts of practices that are likely to happen in unstructured or semi-structured environments. Again, for example, internships, service learning, community-based learning, undergraduate research and learning communities, all of which are examples of high impact practices. I always like to refer to a wonderful 2012 article in EDUCAUSE by Randy Bass, titled "Disrupting Ourselves, the Problem of Learning in Higher Education," where Randy Bass talks about the value of centering co-curricular learning and student-driven learning in their curriculum. So I'm going to quote from him because I think he captures this idea so well. Bass writes, "Where are the high impact practices located in the college experience? Many of these practices are not part of the formal curriculum, but are in the co-curriculum, or what we used to call the extra curriculum, such as undergraduate research." And he goes on to write that to this point, we in higher ed have funded and structured our institutions as if the formal curriculum were the center of learning, Whereas we have supported the experiential co-curriculum and a handful of anomalous courses, such as first-year seminars, largely on the margins, even as they often serve as the poster children for the institution's sense of mission, values, and brand. Now, this is how it's an opportunity for higher ed, but why is it a challenge? It represents a challenge for higher ed because assessment and recognition of informal and unstructured learning is difficult to do well and difficult to do efficiently. One way that educators have tried to assess unstructured learning is via e-portfolio technologies. And in fact, e-portfolios not long ago became the 11th high impact practice that was recognized by AAC&U. And as you'll see, or as I hope you'll see, our use of microcredentials resembles and I think likely complements the use of e-portfolios. However, what microcredentials have allowed us to do better than e-portfolios is to make single and granular claims about students' demonstrations of 21st century skills, which could be quickly understood by employers and shared within networks. And it also allowed us to structure the gathering and review of evidence to support those claims in ways that was very manageable for both students and faculty. All right, so what I'd like to do then is, for just in case folks aren't terribly familiar with digital badges and microcredentials, we're going to take a brief detour to talk about kind of what those things are. So what are digital badges and microcredentials? We tend to discuss badges and microcredentials at the same time, and there's often some confusion about what differentiates those two. I like to think of it this way. So there are claims that we can make about a person's knowledge, skills, and accomplishments. And then there are the technologies that we use to publish those claims. Now, the conventional way in higher ed that we've talked about, we've published those claims, is via diplomas, certificates, and transcripts. And the technologies we've used are paper, and then later on PDF documents. Now, paper technologies and even PDFs have worked well for a good long while, but I think that we're finding in the digital world, there are some ways in which those things are lacking. Like, they're not easily portable in digital networks with paper unless you digitize it first. And digitized versions, even those PDF documents, tend to create big files with relatively little useful information, and they're not machine readable, and it can be difficult to verify the authenticity of those files and those digitized documents. Now, microcredentials, like diplomas and certificates, represent claims about what a person knows, can do, and has accomplished. Microcredential claims differ from conventional credentials in that they tend to be competency-based. That is, they recognize demonstration of competencies rather than seat time like traditional Carnegie units do. Now, microcredentials tend to focus on more specific and granular claims compared to degrees and certificates, and microcredentials tend to be stackable, meaning that each microcredential has value on its own, but then several related microcredentials can stack up and contribute to larger and more comprehensive credentials. The technology on which we publish microcredentials is usually a technology called open digital badges, which is a technological and metadata standard originally developed at Mozilla and now maintained by an organization called IMS Global. This technology allows us to say much more in support of our claims about learning and say it in a standardized way so that it can be easily parsed by many different technology systems. So for instance, we can list criteria that state exactly what a learner had to do to earn a credential. We can align a credential with recognized standards. We can put an expiration date on a credential. We can even attach evidence to the credential itself, such as articles that the student has written, links to websites that the student has developed, links to videos of students demonstrating some skill, or testimonials from people who worked with the student. In addition, the authenticity of digital badges is cryptographically verifiable. This added info, thanks to the technology of open digital badges, can make our claims about learning more useful to the reader, more reputable, and more portable. So pro forma, here are a couple of definitions of microcredentials and open digital badges. So the State University of New York system, which has done a lot of good work around microcredentials and defining terms and processes, they say that microcredentials verify, validate, and attest that specific skills and competencies have been attained, are endorsed by the issuing institution, have been developed through existing faculty governance processes, and are designed to be meaningful and high quality. As for open digital badges, one of my favorite definitions, it's still one of the first, it comes from Carla Casilli and Aaron Knight, who at the time were working at the Mozilla, actually developing this standard. And they write that open digital badges are web-enabled microcredentials that contain specific claims and detailed evidence supporting those claims, which can then circulate in digital networks. Okay. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll actually take this presentation off of autopilot and show you a little bit about how this looks and works within our Moodle learning management system. So I'm going to jump over to my sandbox course, which is a bit messy, as a sandbox course should be. Please don't judge me. Okay. And so what we have here is an example of what this tends to look like in our learning management system, right? You can see that we have directions for how to complete the badge, explanations for students about what are microcredentials, directions for how to apply for the microcredentials. But what I really want you to take, well, and I'll show you too here, as well as explanations that go into kind of what these 21st century skills are. What I want to show you is this link right here, which is to our Open Badge vendor, which is a company called Open Badge Factory, which actually doesn't have much of a footprint in North America, but is well used in Europe, and we chose them because they tend to do student-directed, self-directed recognition and badging quite well. Their features work well for that to be a bit more student-directed, which appealed to us. So what you're looking at here is let's think of it as a menu of microcredentials that the students can earn in this course. We have our 21st century, all of our 21st century skills, and students get to pick what 21st century skills they want to earn in this course, right? Depending on where it is they're working or what they think their strengths are, they might say to themselves, oh, I have lots of opportunities to demonstrate creative thinking, so I'm going to try to earn a microcredential in creative thinking. So they click on that, and what they'll see, and what we're seeing right now, is the actual metadata that's in the microcredential itself. This is housed within the Open Badge. So we have the title of the microcredential. We have the issuer, which is the University of Montana Western. And then we have a description of the microcredential, right? It says this microcredential recognizes that its earner demonstrated effective creative thinking skills while working as an intern. And then it goes on to explain the process that the student had to go through in order to earn the microcredential. To earn it, the student must identify, document, communicate evidence that they have demonstrated creative thinking as defined by the AAC&U Creative Thinking Value Rubric while working as an intern. And it goes through all of the assessment processes and the fact exactly what they had to score on that value rubric in order to earn the microcredential. So I'm going to expand this, and what we have here is the value rubric itself. This is what students use to self-assess and to guide them in finding and gathering evidence to support their own claim to have demonstrated some skill while working as an intern. And I think that's a really important point, right? What we're hoping, what we want is this claim to be a claim that the student is making about themselves. While I was working as an intern at this particular organization, I demonstrated creative thinking abilities. And then I, as the student, I find evidence that I can use to back up that claim. And then I upload that evidence to, and I'll scroll down here. I upload that evidence to this submission form. And that evidence might be in the form of documents that I helped create. It might be in the form of a video of myself, somehow maybe pitching an idea in a meeting. It might be notes from the meeting. It might be the artifact that I eventually created, right? But students can upload whatever evidence they deem appropriate to upload, or they can share links to evidence. With every bit of evidence that they upload, we require them to also provide some sort of supporting narrative, which explains why this evidence that they're uploading is good evidence to support their claim to have demonstrated some 21st century skill while working as an intern. And you can see here, we provide, actually at a few points, we provide step-by-step instructions for exactly what they have to do and what this process looks like for them. So I mentioned that the student decides which microcredential they want to earn, that it's their claim that they make about themselves. So regarding, I think there's something worth mentioning about the student's submission of evidence. And it has to do with this challenge, kind of my framing of this as an opportunity and a challenge for us. And the challenge is how to assess and recognize learning that happens in unstructured and informal environments, because it's hard to do that efficiently. And in our case, that was very much what we found, right? So we faced this barrier of assessing students in their internships, in part because UMW students find their own internship placements, which means that placements are geographically spread out, sometimes hundreds of miles from campus. Student internships also happen in diverse organizational contexts that are often unaffiliated with the university and offer little chance for faculty to coordinate with internship supervisors on curriculum. So these internships are at least semi-structured, authentic, and tend to be very self-directed. And it simply isn't possible for faculty to directly observe and assess students at their internship locations. Nonetheless, we weren't willing to give up on this idea of attaching unique evidence to each student's credential. We wanted each credential to be unique to each student and have evidence of their learning. So we did the only thing that we thought we could do. We made the process of drafting each student's claim in the credential core to the learning and assessment process itself. So students gathered their own evidence, wrote their own framing and explanatory narratives to support their claims to have demonstrated a given skill. And in so doing, we made students the co-authors of their own digital credentials. This use of open digital badges as a learning and assessment tool is, again, I think akin to how e-portfolios are used. And I believe that the high impact benefits of e-portfolios are likely to apply to our use of open digital badges as well. So that said, badges, again, may offer a few added benefits over portfolios, such as a standardized technical structure that allows learners to make claims about their own competencies and accomplishments, claims that are discrete, human and machine readable, and easily shareable in digital networks where other people can interact with and endorse those claims. So with that, I will hand off to Dr. ChristianGilde, and if anyone has any questions about anything I've said, I'll be happy to answer at the end of our presentation.
Thank you very much, Justin. I really appreciate that. Like Justin said, I will talk a little bit more about the general landscape of higher education, contextualize that and how it might work in the bigger scheme of things. And then I will talk a little bit more about how experiential learning factors into this entire equation, and how experiential learning, soft skills, or the 4Cs in this case, work together with the internships, and how we envision integrating that in our own institution and in our own department. So Justin, if you could hop to the next slide, I think that's what the higher education landscape. So if it's just a general education landscape or higher education landscape, over the last 18 months, we had a massive change there. It was already predestined before the pandemic, so a lot of changes were going on, but the pandemic definitely accelerated everything. And the need was already there, especially in higher education, to for workers to stay, for students as well as like professionals or workers to stay relevant and to be lifelong learners and constantly update their skills. And higher education has to do the same thing. Higher education has to stay relevant. It has to update itself, and there are some pretty significant changes on the horizon in order to meet those learners' needs. And if you look at this changing landscape, especially of higher education, I would say that there are kind of like three broad categories that can really focus on like this changing landscape, and that's the accessibility to higher education, the content or the curriculum that this education delivers, and the technology that is used to support higher education, or the knowledge delivery in this case. So if you look at the content of higher education, you have a curriculum that has shifted over time. In the past, you had kind of like a core curriculum that consisted of maybe the arts, humanities, natural sciences, social sciences, to name only a few. And now it's more interdisciplinary. So it's also more STEM oriented. So science, technology, engineering, math, everything blends together. And as those programs find new concentrations, they also focus more on the practicality of things, on the learning by doing, rather than just on the theory. That's kind of the content of the of learning nowadays. When you talk about technology, we have seen disruption before the pandemic, and especially nowadays we see more and more disruption there. It's kind of this instantaneous fulfillment of student needs, that you can go online and you can get something like with badges. If you break them up, if you stack things, you have much more customizable curricula nowadays, much more online delivery with online degrees. And as you can see from the statistics, nowadays the number of students who get degrees or learn online is increasing, whereas the number of residential students is decreasing that are actually on campus. And all of this happens through the supportive learning management systems like Moodle. Another thing is also, could you hop to the next slide, Justin? I was already talking about that nowadays everything is much more focused on hands-on learning and practicality. And how can we deliver that in any kind of education? Is it high school education, a secondary education, or tertiary education? And one good tool in our quiver is experiential learning. So when we look at experiential learning, especially when we undertook this project, how do we find that? It's kind of seizing opportunities to build those skills, those industry, those soft skills, and seeing how the academic concepts are applied in the real world. That's kind of experiential learning. You can kind of have different opportunities there where you have like projects, you have industry conferences, you have company visits that you can do, you can bring guest speakers, and you can use internships like we do at UM Western. And with experiential learning, it's kind of like when students do something, there are real outcomes for real stakeholders. So there's something at stake there. And it enables students to get kind of the essential 21st century skills like the 4Cs in order to succeed in the job market. And it also enables them, when they use experiential learning, to access their knowledge repository a little bit easier, to make it a little bit easier to like retain things, but also to apply things. And it also makes it easier to bridge theory and practice. Justin, could you help to the next slide? Thank you. One application that we considered in one of many applications that we considered in this internship project is COLP's experiential learning cycle. And I assume a lot of you have heard about COLP's experiential learning cycle. It's actually this experiential learning within a circular process. It's like the student reflects on, it begins with a experience that the students have. Then the students reflect on this experience and on the abstract concepts and the theory. And then according to this reflection, they have to change the behavior, improve themselves. And then they're trying to apply what they have improved and learned. But then they're asked to go back again and reflect on this again. So we have a kind of a circular process here. So what it ultimately does is, like Justin said, it brings structure to an unstructured environment through unstructured internship evidence that they deliver. Could you hop to the next slide, Justin? Thank you. So more into this project, we're trying to use those 4 C's, the creativity, communication, collaboration, and critical thinking, these tools, and try to merge them with those internships, try to face them into those internships. And those are skills that especially young people nowadays need in order to succeed in society and to have rewarding experiences, to have rewarding high school, have rewarding university, but also have rewarding professional experiences. And what it does with the internships is the more meaningful the work at the internship is, the more of an advantage those students have when they go out in the job world. So an internship is kind of a tool that kind of takes the classroom and bridges the classroom with the working world. And it gives you the opportunity to really practice and get more technical skills, analytical skills, provides you an insight into a certain industry, leadership, teamwork skills, you name it. And could you hop to the next slide, Justin? So when we look at our institution here in Western, how do we see those badges, Moodle, and those skills that we want them to have? How do we see them working out in our curriculum? And what we're trying to do right now is you're trying to string those badges and those skills, those kind of instances of evidence throughout the curriculum and throughout the 4 years they study with us. So our students can learn throughout those 4 years badges like communication stats, like in a business communications class, a project management badge and an operations management class, or leadership badges, leadership class, business plan, could be an entrepreneurship class, teamwork could be a lot of classes, or in principles of management class, and data analysis could be in a math class or an applied statistics class. So there are a lot of skills that they can pick up throughout their 4 years in college, and also generate additional credentials to show that they have those skills. That's how we envision that. And what I want to do now is I want to hand it over to Dr. Holland. We'll talk a little bit about the results that we got from those internships and what kind of feedback the students gave us.
Thank you, Justin and Christian. I took over the internship course about 2 years ago, and I wanted to find something that would benefit the students besides just the typical assignments. So Justin did a presentation on micro-credentials for our department, and I thought, what a great way for a fit for our internship students. And so that's why this project was really intriguing to me. So the pilot project consisted of 15 students, which we began, spring of 2020. We have since had 47 plus students complete their internships, and we have had 59 or more applications for badges. We chose the internship course to conduct the pilot project for a couple of reasons. The first is every business student is required to do an internship. And two, they usually are doing their internship during their junior, senior year. So the majority of the business core courses will be done by the time that they complete their internship. And like Justin had said earlier, students find their own internships and they are very varied in what they choose to do. And we also have them in several different states. So students will choose to work at a bank. They will work for our guiding outfitter, farm and ranch, insurance company. We have students doing internships with interior design individuals. So it's really varied on what the students choose to do. Next slide, please, Justin. The requirements. So the assignments for the internship were weekly reports where they answer questions about what they accomplished that week. What did they learn from those tasks that they completed? The hours they worked and interactions with their supervisor, for example. They also put together a final summary document, which sums up their entire internship. And then previously they were required to submit a portfolio of all their information, which consisted of their weekly reports, pictures, and a final summary document. But I wanted to try something new, which would benefit the students more and for them to be able to show their skills to future employers. So in addition to their weekly reports and final summary documents, students were to pick 2 micro-credentials to apply for. And also the students will have 2 supervisor evaluations completed during their internship. And the micro-credentials do not override any of those supervisor evaluations. So once they decided on a micro-credential, they needed to provide the evidence along with a narrative as to why that evidence showed that they have the skill. So students submitted items such as brochures they had created and videos of social marketing posts, for example. One student in particular submitted evidence for a collaboration credential, which also could have worked for creativity. She was doing her internship in an accountant's office, and when COVID-19 restrictions were put into place, they had to come up with a way to get tax returns back to customers. So she had to do some creative thinking on how to get that done. She didn't fill in the design thinking graph, but she did have to use creative thinking in order to determine the best route to get those tax returns back. Next slide, please, Justin. So these are just the results again from the pilot project. We had 2 students apply for the oral communication, 1 for written, 4 for critical thinking, 7 for collaboration, and 11 for creative thinking. And through today, as through the summer of our internships, I would say the 2 that most students apply for are the creative thinking and the collaboration micro-credential. Next slide, please. So overall, the students did a fairly good job with the micro-credentials. They did struggle with a few things. Students struggled to understand what micro-credentials were. They struggled to find evidence or provide satisfactory evidence. And they struggled to connect the classroom theory to authentic context in the internship. So for example, using a design thinking chart. Students did not submit all components for the badge. Most students forgot to submit their narrative, and not all students submitted an application for a badge. Next slide, please, Justin. So some of the implications that have come out of this project: have the department add badges to our core courses, have the faculty assist students in their courses to locate evidence so students would understand what good evidence is. Criteria or requirements that we are using are items that the students have heard in their courses. So for example, using the design thinking model within a course, and make sure that they have filled out that graph so they understand what that is. Adjust the rubrics to be more open. So for example, the collaborative rubric is very structured, it seems, to fit more of a meeting type of a setting where our students are doing more things collaboratively, like just working on a project, for example, and it may not be in a meeting type of a setting. And getting the students to download their badges is another one. Some of the other things that we have thought about, do we have employers endorse the student for the badges instead of the instructor on record? And so that's something that we are considering doing. But badges will allow the students to show their skills to future employers through a link where they can view their work. They can show them a presentation that they have done, a commercial they may have directed, a business plan they have created, just to name a few. So I believe that this has been a great addition to our internship class, and I look forward to using it each semester. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
If so, I would say feel free to grab a microphone, or you could type a question into the chat too.
I have a question. This is Joe.
I've got one question, and I may have missed it, but when you have the students upload their evidence, it comes to you and then you assign the badge based on that, or is the badge assigned automatically once they upload it or attach the evidence?
Once the students upload their evidence, and then I go in and I look at all of their evidence, and then I can either ask them to review it or revise it, fix something, or I can award their badge to them. But no, I go through their evidence first before it's awarded.
Yeah.
And I'm the one that awards it.
Thank you. Sorry, I probably missed it. I had another chat going on.
What is the application process for acquiring a badge? What do the students have to do to apply?
So to apply for the badge, first of all, the students have to pick which one they would like to do. And then they read through the requirements that we have loaded on Moodle. And then Justin also showed those that we have loaded on the Badge Factory site as well. But they go through and look at those and they decide which one they would like to apply for. They look at the requirements. And then the student, it's up to the student to find the evidence that they are providing to show that they have creative thinking or collaboration skills. So for example, some students lately are doing social media marketing for businesses. So in their creative thinking, they are showing that social media marketing that they're creating for their badge. Did that answer your question?
Well, I was just wondering if they had a certain application process to even qualify to start a badge.
Nope. They just pick one that they would like to apply for and submit the evidence.
Okay. Thank you.
We had a question in the chat. How would employers endorse a badge, and how would future employers see that endorsement? That's a great question. So I would say there are at least two different ways, three ways really, that employers could endorse a badge. One is with our badge vendor, which is Open Badge Factory, there is a feature where you can have multiple reviewers. So it is possible for when the student submits an application for a badge, what Open Badge Factory does is it sends out an email notification, and it will send that email notification to the faculty, but it can also send an email notification to a particular internship supervisor or any other assessor that you wanted to include in that. So that's one way that I think the employer can, I guess in that way, the employer is not really endorsing, the employer is just contributing to the assessment. But there is actually an endorsement feature included with the Open Badge standard. Not all Open Badge vendors use that feature. Ours does, which is another reason why we went with Open Badge Factory. But so what a person can do is you can really you can write a review on a particular micro-credential that a student earns, which this would allow, if an internship supervisor worked with a particular student and wanted to go in and write that extra endorsement and say, I endorse, I will testify that this student did in fact do the things that they're claiming to have done, and they were great, and we loved having them here, and they'd be a great addition, so forth and so on. They can do that. And there are actually a number of kind of different endorsement features that are built in. And then that, what the student can do then is, it's kind of another feature of it. They're able to then kind of ask the issuer to recertify their badge with that new endorsement. And so then that endorsement would then be baked in, included in the metadata of the open badge. So anyone who read the open badge after that would be able to see that endorsement.
Did you guys create these badges from scratch as far as just the title certification and requirements involved, or is there some kind of library to choose from, or I guess a template on what you can issue badges for? If that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, there are, we based what we did off of, we looked around the landscape to see what other folks were doing. The development of our micro-credentials was based in part on a National Science Foundation grant that we had at and still have, and working with the University at Buffalo, SUNY, to adapt their micro-credential systems to Montana Western. So we used them as an example. We also looked around to see who else was issuing micro-credentials for 21st century skills. As of right now, we're at the very beginnings of your comment about libraries. That's a very prescient question, because right now that's happening. I can think like through Credential Engine and the Open Skills Network. The idea is organizations are saying, hey, let's make our skills libraries open and visible as a way of making skills that are assessed and recognized in one context A. We're gonna make those skills libraries and everything very visible and open, so that it can be better understood in another context. So we're right at the beginnings of there being skills libraries, but there are also templates and guides for how to craft and develop your own micro-credentials that you might want to offer.
So are there any kind of standardization requirements? In other words, more like a broad reaching national level, I guess just like minimum standards that you have to create in your badges that you implement into your course, that, certain things that need to be included? So
yes, there are metadata fields that are included in open badges, okay. But there are only a few of those are required, and they're just the most basic things, like who is the issuer, who is the recipient, what is the title, and then as far as standards, one of the metadata fields, and I hope I'm answering your question, but if not, apologies, and feel free to kind of redirect me. One of the metadata fields is for where you can link to established published standards. So if you wanted to align a micro-credential that you were offering to an established skills framework or other standard, you could do that, and it would be kind of parsable and machine readable that your particular micro-credential was aligned to such and such standard. And as far as there are also emerging best practices too about how to do all of this.
Awesome, perfect. Nope, that answered correctly. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have another question in the chat now. I'll read it, and maybe Denise or Christian, if you want to take this. Is there a chance that badges could be recognized by some employers, but not by other employers?
Well, that is an interesting question. I suppose they could, but seeing that if they can see what the criteria was for that badge and being able to see the evidence, then I would assume that they would accept the badge, would be my thought.
I would just add to that, what gets really interesting is when I've seen it where organizations it will put the value proposition up front in the design of the micro-credentialer badge. So you might have badges operating almost as tiny little MOUs between the issuer and the organization, an employer saying that they are, if someone earns this, we're willing to recognize it and value it in this particular way. Yeah, great, thank you. All right, well, unless any other questions come in, I think we can probably let everyone move on down the virtual hallway to their next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.